Hi, Gayane.
Hi.
Welcome to Two Blonde Shrinks. We are going to be talking about postpartum and all things mom for this episode, and we're so excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in your practice.
Sure. So, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have a practice in Sherman Oaks and I see clients in person and virtually. I specialize in women's well being, pregnancy support, and postpartum support, and couples therapy as well. I became very passionate about the postpartum period after becoming a mom myself 2.5 years ago, and just being in complete shock for about how much I didn't know. And so that's kind of where the passion came from.
You run some postpartum groups, right? At Hillside?
It's one of my specialties actually is running
Very nice.
postpartum groups.
So you must know a lot about all of this.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from the
Yeah.
moms I work with. And I love your posts on Instagram, by the way,
Thank
because
you.
they're so positive and they're so real.
Thank you.
You know, because you typically post things from, we would typically think like, oh, she's a therapist, she probably has it all right and she has everything under control. But when you post things that are so real and relatable, I'm sure the moms are just like, oh, wow, she's not perfect. That means
Yeah.
I don't have to be perfect.
Absolutely.
How often do you actually get moms that reach out to you just thanking you for that?
Yeah, so I'll typically post a poll just to get an idea of like, do people relate to this? And almost always people do relate. I think my biggest thing is to show that, yes, I'm a therapist, but I don't have it figured out. And I'll share that even with my clients, when it feels appropriate. I'll be like, I just had a really bad morning too. Like, I get it.
Oh.
Like, and they'll be like, wait, really? Like, you don't have it all perfect? I'm like, no. And so I lose it too. I regret moments too. I have moments where I'm like, why did I react this way? All of those things absolutely happen, and so on Instagram I'm trying to show that side as well. And I always think like, if someone is coming to my Instagram, they're probably not coming because they have it all figured out, and they're probably struggling in some way. And so I'm hoping that they see my post and kind of have that like, oh my god, like she gets it. So
It's relatable.
yeah, that's
Real
my goal.
talk mom stuff.
That's my goal. And
Yeah.
I have to be honest, it's really hard to break that. I think just being a woman, being in the field, also my culture has to do with it. I feel like nobody really talks about the hardships of like what a mom goes through. And so I've had to sorry.
You want some water?
Get some water.
We're not perfect.
We're in spring
clearly.
right now. It's so dry. Everyone's having allergies.
Yeah.
I've been trying to figure out what I'm allergic to. I wake up for the past 3 weeks
The air.
coughing, and people are looking at me like, oh my god. Like, people
You're not
literally run
sick.
away
You're
from
not
me, or I'm
sick.
sneezing. So no
Yeah.
worries.
Yeah, so I think I've had to really break. I'm still working on that, like showing the realness without it seeming like I'm complaining or I'm not grateful for
Yeah, but
what
you
I
can
have.
complain.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to.
You can actually
Mhm.
complain. It's okay to complain.
Absolutely, and also like two truths can exist of. I can be so happy and so blessed to have my child, but I also can be missing my old life. And
Yeah.
I like to say, and I'm missing my old life.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And so that's my belief is that two things can exist at the same time.
I like to say motherhood is the ultimate duality. It's holding these two juxtapositions at once, which is like the hardest job on earth with the greatest love of your life.
Yeah.
And you're like, how do I reconcile this experience?
Yeah.
Because it's so loaded, right?
Yeah.
Motherhood is so layered and complex, and every day is so different with your kids, and your emotions go from high to low so quickly, and it's hard to navigate at times.
Very. I mean, it was just yesterday. I was getting my son ready, and he's like, I call it like a loose drunk noodle. That's what it is. He literally just goes like that. And so I'm trying to get him dressed, and he's doing that. I'm getting irritated. I'm like, okay, remember, like we get dressed and then we have to go put our shoes on. I'm like walking him through the routine, and I'm getting like really aggravated. All of a sudden he leans forward and he gives me a hug, and I'm like, oh my god, baby, I love you. And then again we're like getting irritated. My husband comes in, he's like, I just like heard you experience over 10 different emotions. I'm like, literally, that's what happened.
Isn't it so crazy? And it's that you can have the hardest day with them, and then that one little smile or that one moment that you describe can just turn it all around and fill your tank.
Absolutely.
And it's like you forget everything else that was so shitty and hard.
Yes.
Just like when you give birth.
Yeah.
Right after birth, moms, your chemicals in your body kick in and you just forget about the pain. You're like, oh, when am I going to have my next child?
Yeah.
You forget about what you just went through. Elizabeth, I know you do a lot of trainings, and you do it for Hillside too, for our trainees on pre and postnatal care. I think it's important for our audience to know the difference between the baby blues and postpartum depression. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the baby blues are like the first 12 days after you give birth. It's that time period where the hormones are dropping off. You're transitioning from pregnancy hormones to breastfeeding hormones, and a lot is happening in the body. And so during that time period, a lot of women experience what we call the baby blues. And it can be a time of sadness, weepiness, a lot of emotions. And anything beyond 12 days, I mean, that's the clinical, is considered postpartum, right? And so it can turn into postpartum depression for women. And I think what's interesting about postpartum depression is for a lot of women, it shows up way later in motherhood. For some women, it's 6 months down the line, and maybe you can attest to this too with the women you work with. So for someone, it's right after they have the baby, they have postpartum. For a lot of women, it's during the pregnancy where postpartum depression shows up. And so for every woman, it's different. I think that most women experience the baby blues. Not every woman experiences postpartum depression.
Yeah, I think
although
it's like
I think
90% of women experience baby blues right after birth.
Yeah. I mean, and I actually think the numbers, quite honestly, may be skewed to some extent. I think a lot more women experience postpartum depression. And another one that doesn't get talked about very often is postpartum anxiety, which a lot of moms struggle with after a baby. And then on an extreme end, some women have what we call postpartum psychosis, where they have a break from reality. And that becomes actually quite serious at times.
Yeah, I had a patient who actually experienced that, and she had thoughts of drowning her baby in the bathtub several times. So we had to make sure that she was never alone with her baby. After, tons of psychotherapy and medication, actually medication came, oh my God, it came through this time, and it really helped her because it was really scary for her, and she had never experienced that before. I think one of the most important things is when we're working with moms, I think you would agree, is preventing the major depressive disorder that could actually occur if we don't get through the postpartum depression part, because then that becomes the more severe depression, which lasts so much longer, and it's just sad because moms don't want to talk about depression. They feel like they're going to be complaining if they say.
There's so much shame.
Yes.
Like
especially in our culture.
Yes.
In the Armenian community, I don't know how it is in your community, Elizabeth, but in our community, it's very, looked down upon when a mother is complaining, or I would say expressing how she feels.
Because our moms never complained. Like they just
right.
But they maybe felt it but didn't express it.
Yeah,
Yes,
because you're not
totally.
supposed to complain. And it's like, and the older women will come up to us, and this is across the board, I feel like, where it's like, well, I did it.
Yes.
Just do what you need to do. It's like, okay, lady, you were miserable for your whole
and
life.
they're miserable now.
Yes.
Like so many of the women from that generation are just so miserable now, and they wish they put themselves first. And they talk about that, right? And so some do, some don't.
Yeah.
But absolutely, there's so much shame, I think, in expressing especially in the postpartum period when you're a new mom. I think there's so much emphasis put on like, you're so lucky, you're so blessed. And then moms have these thoughts, scary thoughts, right? Maybe depressive thoughts or intrusive thoughts, and they don't talk about it. And so I remember talking to a client, and they were talking about their intrusive thoughts of like, what if I drop my baby? Or what if like I, hand my baby to someone and they drop the baby or something happens? And they had these thoughts all day long. And that was robbing them of enjoying some parts of it, at least. Like, I don't think it's like pure joy all day long. Maybe for some. For me, it wasn't.
For none. The moms that I work with, none. And I tell them, I go,
There's
you
no
know
way.
what?
Yeah, if you're getting real, changing
Yeah.
diapers and not sleeping is
it's
not fun.
No.
Your baby can be as cute as can be,
Yeah.
but that's still really hard.
And for me, like the postpartum period, honestly, they're just like there. They don't do much, the baby. And I did, like, the way I love my son now is like the most, like, I've obviously always loved him, but I didn't have that immediate, like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with my baby. Like, I love him to death.
Yeah.
But it wasn't this, like, I'm in love with you. I was like, what the hell is happening? This whole breastfeeding thing, like, what the hell is this? I'm next to my husband, but we're not like communicating normally. Things change. And so I would say for me, this age is like the cutest. It's really hard, but like the love we experience now is so different than when they're just like laying there.
Yeah, some women are not into the infant phase. I find working with the different moms that it's like it's person dependent. Some moms love the toddler phase. There are some that I met that love that like mushy infant phase where they're just so adorable and tiny. But you know, it's a really hard time. And I think a lot of people, there's stigma for moms, just like there is for mental health and seeking help around motherhood, right? The stigma is that we should have this figured out. We should be good at this. We should automatically feel connected to our babies. But if moms are struggling, they're not going to have that connection until they get the support they need to find that connection, right? Because it doesn't come naturally for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so we have to acknowledge that. And, you know, maternal mental health, you know, we as a society are not supporting moms enough. I think we could afford to have more pay, paternal support as well, so that people can be home with their babies, because 0 to 1 is so important for attachment.
Yeah.
It's so important to have those early experiences with your baby.
Absolutely.
It wires them for life.
Yeah.
How were you with your, I mean, you probably have a lot to say about this too, but, you know, did your husband ever feel neglected, like you weren't paying attention to him? Because I know I do the postpartum work with moms, but I also do it with the dads. Mm-hmm. And when I throw in postpartum, they're just like, I didn't give birth. I said, no, but it's still your baby. It's postpartum. You know, it's still your baby, and you just became a father. Your whole identity changed as well. Yeah. So, like, did you have that conversation with your husband?
I think for me, it was a very big shift, because I've been with my husband since we were 16 years old, and I've known him forever. And I was always like, for me, my relationship, like, yeah, I wanted to be a mom, but like being a wife and like in a relationship with him was like a huge priority to me. And so when I had my son, naturally it shifted, and I never understood what that meant. Like, I remember someone telling me, you're going to hate your husband at some point. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way. I get it now. I love him. But
what were you hating? Why did you hate him?
There's this resentment of like, why am I going through all of this and you're not? Like, you know, you bleed after you give birth for like a few weeks, and then the breastfeeding and the pain with that, and then the hormonal shifts, and like nothing happened to him. His body is the same, you know, his mental state is the same. Yeah, he was sleep deprived, and he was very hands-on from day one. I also want to add to that, because I think it's so important to include your partner in all of it. Yeah. Because I see a lot of moms are like, I got this, I'll just figure it out.
Yeah, but then moms end up resenting their husbands.
Absolutely.
I was actually having this conversation yesterday with a mom that I was working with, and, you know, she was like, I don't want him to do anything because he's not going to do it right. And I said, okay, then you're just going to be stressed out of your mind. Yes. Or you can just let him learn through his mistakes, you know? So if he's not changing the diaper right and your baby has a blowout, guess what? He just learned that he needs to do it different next time. And maybe this could be kind of like teamwork of like, hey, this is the way I do it. Maybe you want to try it that way. And I see a lot of moms resenting their husbands, exactly what you're saying. Yeah. They don't do as much as I do, but at the same time, moms are not giving husbands or dads the opportunity to be a dad.
Yes. And then dads feel like they don't know how to fit in. So they don't know how to fit in. I've heard that a lot. I've heard that a lot, that they don't know how to help, because the mom is like, well, this is like my job. I take this role on, so I'll just take care of everything, and you go work or you do whatever. And so I made it always a point to include my husband, like for him to feel like, I mean, obviously, like you're the parent too, but also rewriting the generational cycle and you know, what we've been kind of
Yeah.
stuck in. And like my dad never changed a diaper. He actually now has changed my son's diaper once. But even for grandparents, it's like in a strange way, they're also breaking a lot of generational cycles. So yeah, I made it a big point to have him included, talk to him about these things. I remember at some point we had like a check-in, and I was like, things are not like, we're bickering every minute. We need to do like a reevaluation of what's going on. And I remember that was very helpful. So I think, and also preparing for all of this, that's a huge part that's missing, as you were saying. We take prep classes for like sleep training or giving birth or breastfeeding and all these different, like, or potty training, right? But there's no prep class for like what happens after birth to the mental state of the mom, or what happens to the relationship, what happens to self-care. Like, nobody talks about these things. And so I had actually started a group to prepare moms for postpartum, and that was a big passion of mine, of like, I need to get women ready for this. There's a book called Fourth Trimester that really talks about all these things. That was a very helpful resource for me. And the whole like checking in with your partner came from that book, that I was like, okay, I need to remember this when time comes. So yeah, I think dads absolutely feel left out. They don't know how to fit in. They do something and then you're telling them they're doing it wrong. And so that's, I could totally see in those moments how couples disconnect, and how this is just a recipe for a disaster, and how working on your relationship becomes even harder as parents. Like, you really have to work at it, because all of your, you know, inner child parts come out, and you're trying to reparent yourself while trying to work on the relationship. It's just a lot of things.
It's sort of a perfect storm, I like to say, after you have a baby. It's just trying to navigate this whole storm.
Yeah.
And we have to talk about the identity shift that takes place, because so many women that I work with come into my office and they're like, who am I now? They have this identity crisis. It's almost like an existential crisis to some extent. They're like, well, I was this person before, but now who am I now that I'm a mother?
Yeah.
And it's really challenging for a lot of women to integrate this new world that they have, being a mom, this 24/7 job, right? Kids can call you at any moment of the day and you're on call, right? So I think for a lot of women, navigating that new role in life is really hard, and then integrating the husbands. I'm really big on like, okay, moms, allocate to your husbands what you want to do. So like, if it's a 3 a.m. feed for the baby and you're exhausted, have that bottle ready for him, have his alarm by the bed, have him go to that baby.
And most of the time, I mean, if a relationship has a healthy foundation, they're more than willing to help. It's usually the mom well, my husband works, so I'll take care of it. No, like, what you're doing is work too.
Well, honestly, I mean, not to go into more like, you know, genders, but if a woman works full time, she'll come home and continue to work, where we're more caretakers. So if the man is working, they get home, we're like, oh, he's been working all day, like he should relax. Nope.
It's really, I sort of put the burden on moms because they come and complain to me, right? But I'm like, all right, well, what are you saying to your husband? Like, tell him what you need and want from him.
Yeah.
If you want diapers changed, if you want bottles washed, whatever it is, make that clear. Communicate it. Because men are not mind readers.
No.
They're not.
No.
And men are really good when you give them a job.
Yeah.
You know, they're, you know, you need to tell them, like, okay, I need you to do this, and then they'll do it, you know, or can you help me with this? They're like fixers. However, I mean, you brought up the cultural component of it, and it's when we get the in-laws involved, the perfect mother-in-law or the grandma who raised the 15 children and cleaned the house and cooked 12 meals a day comes to us and says, you know, like, chicas, you have to let him rest. He supports you, blah, blah, blah. And you're just like, yeah, but I'm taking care of the baby and feeding them and not showering and not going to the bathroom and not sleeping and not. So the empathy within our culture is missing because they, you know, they're very hard on the women, especially the moms. And it's very sad. I see it often. How are you dealing with your in-laws, and have you experienced that, you know, as a Armenian woman, mom?
Yeah, so I think that the generational cycle we're trying to break is a very big responsibility. Okay, so I think what we're carrying with us, like, not only are we like trying to work and be moms and do all the things, we're also breaking generational cycles. So
Yeah.
I have a lot of like patience with that, of that they just don't understand. Like, thankfully both of our families were very understanding, and like, I'm doing things a certain way, and like, even though so many of the things were new to both families, they were just like, okay, like, you guys are doing sleep training, like, okay, we don't get it, but like, we're gonna we're gonna respect it. And so
That's very
that was,
nice.
yeah, it's definitely a huge blessing. And I also have clients who didn't have such support, and so helping them put boundaries, but in a respectful way, because we can't just cut off our families. Like,
No.
especially in our culture, it doesn't work to like cut out the, let's say if it's a toxic environment, and say like, all right, we're never talking to you guys again. No. And also, I think families have so much support to offer. Like, I don't know where I would be without my in-laws and without my parents. With helping babysit him when we traveled, or babysitting when I studied for my licensing exam, and helping with all of that process and working. And so I think they have so much to offer, and being on good terms is really good to have.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are mother-in-laws or even moms that are commenting on, how you're breastfeeding and how you're sleep training and how you're disciplining. And so I think creating boundaries is really important. I understand that in especially the Armenian culture, that can be very hard, but I think as long as you and your partner are on the same page, that can be very helpful. So maybe if it's his parents, he can speak to them about the boundaries, and if it's your parents, you can tell them what you're doing. I mean, even until this day, my dad will, like, let's say something to my son. I'm like, no, like, he'll say, don't cry. And I'm like, no, he can't cry. And he's like, it's fine. He's a big boy. I'm like, no, he can cry, baby. I'm like, you can cry.
That's
Yeah.
such a generational thing you're
Totally.
talking about, the idea of like boys don't cry.
Totally.
And our generation is much more about like being in touch with your emotions, honoring what is,
Yeah.
all of that. But you touch upon a couple things. One is that it takes a village to raise kids.
Yes.
I mean, that is so important and so huge.
Absolutely.
And then also boundaries, right? When
That's
you
a
have
hard
that
one.
baby, a lot of moms feel super protective. They don't want to relinquish power or control. And a lot of in-laws are invasive. I see this a lot with the clients that I work with. They're trying to navigate not only being a new mom, but how do I navigate my in-laws or my mom who wants to take over with my baby?
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's all about finding a new balance and rhythm with a comfortability in these boundaries.
Absolutely.
Comparing is like, as you're saying that, what comes up for me is how moms are comparing themselves to whether it is their in-laws or their own mom, or even other moms on Instagram. It's just it gives you such an unrealistic expectation, and just disconnects you from the people that you're supposed to be close with.
Yeah.
Like if your own family, for instance, is, really just kind of judgmental on you, it doesn't allow you to get close to them. Then you open Instagram, and these, the moms are like, I'm going to yoga class and I'm 100 pounds after giving birth to a 10-pound baby yesterday. That's not realistic.
No.
Okay. And I always remind the moms that I talk to, I say that people post things on Instagram that are, more positive than negative, and it's very unrealistic. Just like your in-laws and your parents would tell you all the things that they were able to do, the talk of, it was actually really hard raising you, when we couldn't afford food, or when I was alone most of the time because your father was working, or, I couldn't walk after giving birth, or whatever it is. We don't talk about those things enough, and we don't normalize it, which should be normalized, because that's the truth. The competition amongst women, especially when you become a mom, I feel like it's aggressive.
Yeah, and the pressure too, I think, I mean, in the Armenian culture, that's, the first 40 days, it's definitely
Yeah.
something that you like keep it, but then people come over still, and then you're expected to host and like put things on
Yeah.
the table.
I don't know if you know that, but the first 40 days you're hosting like 150 people
Yeah.
in your
It's
house.
so funny you
ridiculous.
say that because there's a book called, I think it's like The First 30 Days, and it's a Japanese book
Yeah,
about
it's
how
in
women
other
are supposed to
cultures, too.
literally be taken care of and not leave their bed or take a shower. Do
I'm going to
anything for
adhere by
30
the
days.
Japanese book of the 30 days of me laying down in bed and not doing
They're
anything.
They get a
literally meals are
massage.
supposed
Yeah.
meals
Oh.
are supposed to be brought to them. Someone's supposed to brush their hair.
No, in our culture we do the opposite. we
I
just
don't know
gave
how that's
birth and we're doing
possible.
everything.
Yeah.
I
You would be
mean,
amazed.
I gave birth in COVID, and that was a
You were so
one
happy,
policy-
probably.
Honestly,
You're like,
I
thank
was
God.
like looking back at my pictures. I was like, I can't even imagine hosting. Like, there's
Yeah,
no
it's
way.
insane.
Sounds
There
awful.
needs to be, and I am gonna very bluntly say this, there needs to be a shift in our culture with the way that we treat women
Yeah,
and the expectations we
absolutely.
have when they become a mother. First, when they become a wife, and then when they become a mother.
Yeah.
Because there's no empathy for women in our culture, and it's
Yeah.
just sad. You know, like men are put on this pedestal, my son, and the women
Yeah.
are like working, cleaning, cooking, having babies, taking care
Yeah.
of them, hosting and doing all this stuff. And
I think it's out, not just Armenian women. I think
Mhm.
it's a bigger deal of like the self-sacrificing aspect of woman, right? Like, I'll
Yeah.
give everything to my family, and then they're not left with much. So I think that's why self-care is such a huge thing that I at least talk about with my clients.
totally.
Putting themselves first.
What do you feel like there like 3 things to take away from today's episode, you know, for our audience? What would you say women should really consider? 3 things
Consider
in terms of self-care.
in terms of self-care. Well, this can be part of self-care. I think consider educating yourself about the postpartum period,
Mhm.
getting to know about what that looks like. Therapy would be self-care for sure. I don't know
Like
where
groups
I would
and
be.
stuff.
Honestly, individual, I don't know where I would be without my own therapist in the postpartum phase. Like, I'm so thankful that she was there. I was seeing her once a week during that time.
Mhm.
And third is make sure you carve out time for yourself, even if that's a 10-minute walk, even that if it's a phone call with a friend you haven't talked to. I think when we think of self-care, it can be so overwhelming to think about, like, I don't have time for any of it. So think small. Start from something small.
Like micro self-cares.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Micro
it's just a
things
glass
you
of
do.
water. I
Yeah.
find like, okay, just
Yeah.
drink water
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
and like be quiet for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
Even
actually
for a
self-care.
minute.
You know, it's so micro, but
Yeah.
it actually goes a long way.
I agree with you.
And you know,
Yeah, I definitely agree with you, girls. I always say take a minute at a time, and it adds up to several minutes.
Oh, I
So
like
little
that.
micro self-care things adds up to
Yeah.
a bigger self-care, because it is hard for a mom to sit there for even 5 minutes, you know, and you guys know this, to enjoy, but like a minute, it's good. Sometimes that even feels long. But yeah, self-care is very important, and I really appreciated what you said. You made it very simple to really just educate yourself, work on yourself, and give to yourself is
Yeah.
basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gayane. We really appreciate your time. And could you give us your Instagram handle? That way people could follow
Sure.
you too and see all your amazing posts. I
Thank
love
you.
your office style, by the
Thank
way.
you.
You inspire me on a
Aw.
daily. I love the color scheme.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Yeah.
for having me.
thanks for
You,
being here.
you can find me on Instagram at Therapy with Gayane. That's Gayane.
Like Diana, but Gayane. Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a
guys
beautiful
so
day.
much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye.